And the fight goes on the Trump side. The president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is not backing down on the president's efforts to challenge the results of the election. He's leading the charge in several states, and earlier today he talked about some of the legal issues the president's team plans to contest.
They literally counted these ballots in secret. And they counted these ballots in secret for only one reason. These ballots were always the ballots they were going to use to try to catch up if they were behind. And it is not a coincidence that it happened in 8 different Democrat states, which means it had to be an order from somewhere. So where do we have them? We have big numbers, definitely in Michigan. Not quite the numbers that we have in Pennsylvania, but enough to overturn the result there.
Giuliani says at this point it would be wrong for President Trump to concede. Some states where Trump's campaign filed lawsuits challenging the results have already been tossed out. And more than 24 hours after the presidential race was called and Joe Biden declared the winner, President Trump and a number of Republican lawmakers have yet to concede the race, as we just said. And joining us now is Fox 5's Jessie Tenor. She's live in Washington, D.C. tonight, where the Trump administration is vowing to fight these results. Jessie.
Yeah, good evening, Misha. This is always that frenzied transition period between the election and Inauguration Day. And President Trump continues to make it very clear he won't make it easier by conceding.
The people have spoken.
President-elect Joe Biden and his team are ready to get to work. Senior campaign advisor Simone Sanders says, as President Trump continues to insist he won the election.
I think the White House has made clear what their strategy is here and that they are going to continue to participate and push forward these flailing and in many respects baseless legal strategies.
The Trump campaign is moving forward with recounts and lawsuits in several closely contested states to ensure only legal votes are counted, which Utah Republican Mitt Romney says the president has the right to do.
It's fine to pursue every legal avenue that one has, but I think one has to be careful in the choice of words. I think when you say that the election was corrupt or stolen or rigged, that's unfortunately rhetoric that gets picked up by authoritarians around the world.
Even some of President Trump's most loyal allies, like former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, are growing weary of the challenges.
We can't back you blindly without evidence. And if they don't come forward with the proof, then it's time to move on.
The Trump campaign could announce more legal action Monday, as Biden plans to take his first action as president-elect, appointing his own coronavirus task force. Transition team member Pete Buttigieg says Biden hopes to influence legislation during Congress's lame duck session.
He'll decide on the right course of action, but I think there's a sense of urgency throughout.
And actions President Trump may still take over the course of these next couple months may be firing several cabinet members, signing a slew of executive orders, and resuming travel. Misha?
Before we let you go, how serious, what is the gauge that you're getting on the Trump campaign about these legal challenges and taking them as far as they possibly can?
There does seem to be this split on exactly when they should stop pursuing these legal challenges. But as far as the campaign is concerned, they will still keep moving forward. But it is interesting that we're even hearing some of President Trump's closest advisors, even family members, are pretty split on how he should move forward. Should he concede, or should he still keep pushing with these legal challenges? So we'll have to see how things iron out even over the next couple days.
So then if he doesn't concede, and he is made point that he is not going to, especially if there's a legal issue, what can the Republican Party then do to go forward?
Yeah, when it comes down to it, conceding is really more along the lines of tradition, which we know from President Trump's time in the White House these past about 4 years, that he doesn't follow that as much. And so moving forward, it looks like, as far as conceding goes, state agencies, things of that nature that have to work with transitions could potentially still move forward and do that. And we are hearing too that things are already happening behind the scenes along those lines. So we'll see. But it does put, like you heard from some Republicans, kind of in this awkward spot of how do we respond when some of them won re-election themselves.
Sure. All right, Jessie Tenor, thank you so much. Live for us tonight in Washington, D.C. Thank you.